This is huge news for all of us crazy kaiju fanatics out there. We all know Yongary Monster from the Deep, which is arguably one of, if not the, most well-known classic South Korean kaiju flick out there. In fact, I did a whole podcast discussing that film in length and why it is more than just a Godzilla knockoff. But I never got into the details of Korea's history with kaiju films. While listening to the fantastic audio commentary on Yongary Monster from the Deep by Steve Rifle and Kim Sung-ho, both mention a thought-to-be-lost South Korean kaiju flick that actually predated Yongary. And that film was Space Monster Wangmagwi. It has since been found since it did that commentary, and it looks to have been fully restored. That is, after all, more than I can say for the Korean version of Yongary Monster from the Deep. I have to thank Steve Rifle and Kim Sung-ho for really opening my eyes to Korean cinema. While I am nowhere near as versed with Korean cinema as I am with classic Japanese cinema, I can easily say South Korean classic cinema is now my second favorite of the Asiatic countries. And that commentary gave me a lot of context to the hows and whys of 1960s South Korea. They were run by a dictator named Park Chung-hee. It was basically a third world country at best, and it had less than a third of the population that it had today. Korea back then was vastly different than what we know of today. Now, with all that in mind, it made me look at Yongary with a whole new light. Instead of just a cheap knockoff of Godzilla with a vastly inferior story and terrible special effects, I see an admirable attempt which pushed the boundaries of what Korean cinema could be. Anytime I hear a lost film, my mouth immediately starts watering, like, what is it? What could have been within that film? What am I missing here? This film had several posters and stills readily available. You see what the monster looked like. You can see it was indeed released. But nothing much else was known other than apparently it had over 150,000 extras. The trailer that was recently released, that didn't show 150,000 extras. I have yet to know if that's actually a real figure or if that's just a promotional figure or something for the promotional materials. But the pictures intrigued me the most, and the creature didn't really look like a typical kaiju of the era. In fact, it looked far more like a B-movie sci-fi alien creature we saw within 1950s Hollywood. Most notably, it actually reminded me of the It from It, The Terror Beyond Space. Wangmagwi was shot in black and white, and now we know from the trailer that it was actually shot in the Academy ratio, a 4:3 aspect ratio. SRS Cinema has announced that they will release this fully restored version of South Korea's first feature-length kaiju film, and my mouth is absolutely watering. I'm already planning on pre-ordering it. Now, admittedly, I'm not too familiar with this company. I know they specialize in obscure things and released the recent film Nezura. They remind me of Arrow Video, except with a smaller budget to work with. As for the movie itself, it looks exactly what I had expected it to. In all seriousness, this movie looks like an episode of Ultra Q, but with South Korean actors in it. And I'm okay with that. You know, I wasn't expecting lavish special effects like we know and love from Toho and some of the Dai films and etc., made around the same time. And I think the black and white helps the movie considerably because the grain and the camera angles almost remind me of a George Romero movie in a weird way, like a George Romero or even an Ed Wood movie, as weird as that sounds, because it basically means that it had a lower budget than normal, but it was also shot with a genuine passion and interest in the story that was being told. Now, I say low budget by Hollywood standards, hell, even Japanese standards within the 1960s, but for Korea, I'll bet the budget for Wangmagwi was actually rather extensive. I mean, Yongary, let's look at Yongary for a second. Yongary had one of the highest budgets for a Korean film to that point, with just, at most, $120,000. Now, while Yongary was a big hit in Korea, it did not make enough money back to compensate for its huge budget at just $120,000. Even by 1960 standards, that was minuscule. In fact, the producers of Yongary blame the movie for them needing to actually close their studio doors. The makers of Yongary specifically got permission from the South Korean government to go to Japan and learn the craft of suitmation, which is exactly what we got. Masao Yagi designed the monster suit with the money that was given, and it looks like a Masao Yagi designed monster. You know, it has glowing eyes, it has a big horn on its snout, etc., etc., etc. And the filmmakers also shot the effects at a high frame rate, in full color, and an anamorphic widescreen. They also had access to an optical printer, clearly, which helped combine special effects shots together with the live-action footage. It clearly looks like Wangmagwi did not have any of this luxury. From what I know, this film was truly an all-South Korean cast and crew, which, if true, makes Wangmagwi an even more impressive film when analyzing the time period in which it was made. And I think the filmmakers of Wangmagwi actually utilized their budget more effectively. Again, this is just from what I've seen in that brief little trailer. The black and white truly helps hide many of the natural flaws we would have gotten otherwise, which we certainly see in droves in a film like Yongary Monster from the Deep. In fact, some of these shots look pretty decent with good framing. The filmmakers clearly utilized that aspect ratio to help give Wangmagwi a sense of height, which isn't as easy to do when shooting an anamorphic widescreen. The biggest issue I see, and probably due to the lack of resources that they had, is it rarely used high frame rates to give their monsters scale. Shooting at a high frame rate really helps sell a monster's size, really more than anything else, I think. And Wangmagwi just doesn't achieve this look. It looks like a really bad, inarticulate monster suit smashing styrofoam buildings. But how much of this can I really judge with, one, just from the trailer, and two, the knowledge that South Korea just simply, they had never made a movie like this before. Now, the giant foot prop was certainly impressive, though, and that's something that Yongary never had. And I also took note of the practical effects, which sounds odd to hear me point out, but Yongary had some composite shots within it. For example, one of them that I'm thinking of is Yongary's horn beam that shoots a laser out of it. Now that costs a lot of money, because I have no doubt that anywhere in South Korea really specialized in that effect at the time, which would explain why the horn is shown so little throughout the film. Now, Wangmagwi certainly did not have the same resources that Yongary did, so the choice of a mist power that shoots this mist out of its snout on top of its head, whatever, it melts the steel, and that's actually an interesting one, because they could do literally all of that within camera. And I also noted the alien spacecraft and the backdrops and the Earth. It's all right there. All of that is being done in camera. There's no even force perspective being used there. And in all seriousness, quite frankly, it reminded me of the old Flash Gordon serials, or even Plan 9 from Outer Space. Sorry, but it did. Now, I want to be clear about something right up front, and Space Monster Wangmagwi is actually not a lost film. It was never a lost film. The movie never truly disappeared, but instead was held back from distribution for copyright reasons, according to IMDb. Now, I have a theory about this based upon all the information that I have at hand, which is very minuscule. According to Steve Rifle and Kim Sung-ho, the producers of Yongary actually sued the makers of Wangmagwi from getting their film released. After all, both films were being made simultaneously in 1967. Now, I'm not sure how successful the producers of Yongary were in stopping the release of Wangmagwi, but it is safe to say that Yongary was a larger hit and did manage to get distribution overseas, which was a part of their goal. Wangmagwi remained in relative obscurity except for those stills and posters mentioned earlier, and I think the producers of Yongary had a good hand in that. After all, Yongary was being directed by Kim Ki-duk, and he was known as one of the most commercially successful directors in South Korea at that point. I mean, he made all sorts of films catering to different audiences, and all of them were smash hits. And I know nothing about the director of Wangmagwi, and there is little information anywhere online. So my guess is the producers of Yongary are largely why this film remained frozen due to copyright reasons. Not so much an actual lost film as was advertised in the trailer. But this is working off of the extremely limited information that I have, and I could be completely wrong on that in all fronts. If somebody knows and is more of an expert in South Korean cinema, please let me know. I would love to know the story. As for the plot of Wangmagwi, well, it's no different than most giant monster movies made around this time. Evidently, aliens are looking to take over Earth, and they use a giant monster to try and do so. Now, where have I seen that plot before? So it's nothing special, which neither was Yongary. In fact, Yongary was an even more straightforward plot than what we seem to be getting in Wangmagwi. Now, in both films, there is a little boy who ends up having an important tie with the monsters. Something about a big wedding in both of the films. Needless to say, like Yongary, the story of how it was made and the production behind it and its place in history is more interesting than the movie itself. The film seems to even borrow from King Kong, seeing as the lead actress is captured and carried around by Wangmagwi. But neither Wangmagwi nor Yongary needed to reinvent the wheel. Both were South Korea's first major attempts at making a kaiju feature-length movie. Yongary certainly has a nationalistic attitude. It is Koreans who save the day from a Korean monster which swoops down from the north. Korean families stick together and save the day. They use Korean satellites to monitor nuclear tests. And the Korean military is ready to defend its citizens from the monster. Now, I'm curious if Wangmagwi will do something similar, seeing as this was made at the height of the Park regime. Nationalism was at an all-time high in Korea, and censorship laws became more and more stringent on filmmakers. Making family-friendly films had become all the rage in South Korea simply because it was what most people could, make a safe bet on in terms of making a movie. Now, I won't know if Wangmagwi was trying to do something similar or do the complete opposite. I'm not quite sure. I haven't seen the movie yet, and I'm really looking forward to watch it. Here, there's a lot to unpack with the history of Wangmagwi and everything like that, including his roar. It was also used in Yongary, but I chopped that up to it being just a stock roar that South Korea had at the time. I cannot wait to see this film, and I will certainly be getting it when it is released, and I really hope it has special features. Right now, there is just a tentative list, and boy howdy have I been let down with those tentative lists in the past, where they advertise them that they're going to be there, and then they're not there, so I'm not paying attention to it as it's listed so far. But I'm hoping that it at least gets a good audio commentary, because this is one hell of a story that should be told. And I certainly will be listening to it. It'll probably even be better than the movie itself. So I will definitely be talking about this more in the future. This is certainly something that I'm very much interested in, and I hope you are too. Clearly you are if you're watching this. So, all of my social media is available in the description below. And in the end, this is Adam Noyce of And Productions saying sayonara.